Clara Bennett hadn't cried since the day they buried her father in borrowed ground. She didn't cry when the bank took everything. Didn't cry when the stage driver left her 30 miles short of nowhere. And she didn't cry now, not even with blood soaking through her boot and the Wyoming sun hammering down on her like a judgment from God. She knocked on that ranch door anyway, because crying was a luxury. And Clara Bennett had run out of those a long time ago. If this kind of story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. The dog heard her first. A big tawny cattle dog with a torn ear and a disposition that had never once been described as friendly. He came around the corner of the barn at a dead run, stopped 20 feet short of the gate, and just stood there, hackles raised head low, watching the woman on the road with eyes that couldn't decide between aggression and something closer to confusion. She wasn't running, wasn't begging, wasn't doing any of the things a person in her condition was supposed to do. She was walking, one foot in front of the other, slow, deliberate, and straight-backed in a way that cost her something with every single step. Her left boot was dark with dried blood from the ankle down. Her dress, once a respectable shade of brown, had been reacquainted with every patch of dust between Laramie and the Lone Creek Valley. She had a saddlebag over one shoulder, a canteen on the other, and nothing else to her name that was visible. Her horse was gone. Had been gone since before dawn. She didn't look at the dog when she reached the gate. She looked at the house. It was a working ranch house, nothing pretty about it, nothing meant to be. 2 stories of timber and determination, a covered porch running the full length of the front, a stone chimney at each end. The kind of place that had been built to last and had managed it through sheer stubbornness. The kind of place that looked like it would stand long after the people inside it were gone. Clara Bennett set her hand on the gatepost and stopped. She gave herself 3 full seconds. That was all she allowed. Then she pushed the gate open and walked toward the porch. Ethan Walker heard the dog go quiet. That was what pulled him off the fence line, not the sound, but the sudden absence of it. Hector didn't go quiet for nothing. Ethan had owned that dog for 6 years, and in 6 years he had learned that Hector's silences meant more than most men's speeches. He came around the barn with a bridle in one hand and his hat pushed back on his head, and he saw her before she saw him. His first thought was practical: she was hurt. His second thought was harder to name. She was standing at the foot of his porch steps with her back straight and her chin level, and her eyes fixed on the front door of his house like it owed her something. She hadn't knocked yet. She was just looking, like she was deciding something, like she was giving herself permission. He watched her take a breath, watched her square her shoulders. Then she raised her hand and knocked. 3 times. Even. Not desperate, not pleading, just certain. Ethan Walker hadn't had a woman on this property in 4 years. He hadn't had a visitor who wasn't trying to collect money or deliver bad news in nearly as long. He walked toward the porch slowly, and he kept his right hand loose at his side. "Help you," he said. She turned. He'd been expecting he didn't know what he'd been expecting. Fear, maybe. The kind of shattered look that went with the condition she was in. Instead, he got a pair of green eyes that were clear and direct and carrying something he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't desperation. It was closer to resolve. "I'm looking for work," she said. "Ranch work. I can ride, I can mend fence, I can cook if that's what's needed. I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for a fair wage and a place to sleep that isn't open sky." Ethan looked at her boot. She noticed. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I took a fall about 6 miles back," she said. "Horse spooked and ran. It's not as bad as it looks." "That's so," Ethan said. "Yes." He looked at the saddlebag, at the canteen, at the way she was distributing her weight slightly off that left side, even while she was trying not to show it. "You got a name," he said. "Clara," she said. "Clara Bennett." The name hit him somewhere behind the sternum. He didn't show it. He'd had 20 years of practice not showing things. But his hand, which had been loose at his side, closed slowly around the bridle strap. "Bennett," he said. "Yes." "From where?" Her eyes didn't move from his. Originally from about 40 miles east of here. My father owned land in the valley before. She paused. Something shifted in her expression, something controlled and deliberate. Before circumstances changed. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I don't hire women, he said finally. I don't recall asking your opinion on the matter, Clara said. I asked if you had work. Something moved through him, not quite amusement, not quite irritation. Something in between that he didn't have a comfortable name for. Miss Bennett, he said, I've got 11 men on this property, and not one of them would take kindly to. I didn't ask what your men would take kindly to, she said. I asked if there was work. If the answer is no, I'll trouble you for some water, and I'll be on my way. Ethan studied her. She held his gaze without blinking. He'd been managing people most of his adult life. Cowhands, creditors, lawyers, neighbors, with wandering cattle and wandering intentions. He knew how to read the difference between a person who was trying to deceive him and a person who was simply trying to survive. This woman was trying to survive. But there was something else underneath it that he couldn't quite get to. Something she was holding back. Something deliberate. Water I can manage, he said. Work I'll have to think on. Fair enough, she said. She said it with a dignity that made him feel for one strange moment like he was the one who'd been granted the concession. He gave her water. He gave her a corner of the bunkhouse porch where she could clean and wrap her ankle out of the sun. He told himself he'd decide about the rest after he'd talked to his foreman. His foreman's name was Del Purdy, 53 years old, built like a fence post. Someone had tried to bend and failed, and possessed of opinions he distributed freely and without invitation. No, Del said before Ethan had finished explaining. I haven't asked you anything yet. You don't need to. I know that look. Del didn't take his eyes off the fence he was repairing. You're about to do something that's going to cause me a considerable amount of grief, and you want me to tell you it's not a terrible idea, so you can tell yourself you consulted somebody. She knows ranch work. She says she knows ranch work. Her hands say the same thing. Del stopped what he was doing, turned slowly. You looked at her hands. I notice things. Ethan. Del set down his pliers with the careful energy of a man exercising great patience. We've got 11 men sleeping 20 feet away. We've got enough trouble with Hayes's people cutting our lines every other week. We've got the north pasture fence coming down, and 30 head of cattle that have wandered God knows where since Tuesday. We do not have room for... She said her name is Bennett. Del went very still. Bennett, Ethan said again. Said her father owned land east of here before circumstances changed. Del picked up his pliers, set them down again. Lord Almighty. Yeah. You think she knows? I think she knows something, Ethan said. I think the question is how much. Del turned to look across the property to where Clara was sitting on the bunkhouse steps, carefully rewrapping her ankle with a strip of cloth she'd torn from the hem of her underskirt. She worked methodically without drama, with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this before and expected to do it again. So, what are you going to do? Del said. I don't know yet, Ethan said, but he was still watching her. He came back to her an hour later. She'd finished with her ankle. She was sitting on the bunkhouse steps with the saddlebag open in her lap, and she was reorganizing the contents with the systematic thoroughness of someone who was counting what she had left. She closed it and looked up when she heard his boots on the ground. I'll give you a week's trial, Ethan said. Bunkhouse is for the men. There's a storage room off the barn. It's clean, it's dry, it's got a cot and a lantern. You'll earn your keep same as anyone else here. If you can't pull your weight, you're gone. If you cause trouble with my men, you're gone. If I find out you're here for any reason other than the one you told me you're gone. Clara looked at him. And if I do my job, she said, then we'll talk about what comes next. All right, she said. She stood, and the effort of it cost her something in her face, even though she controlled it immediately. She picked up the saddlebag and held out her right hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and businesslike and brief. One more thing, he said before she could turn away. Sir, the name Bennett. That name means something in this valley. He kept his voice level. I need to know what you're expecting to find here. Clara looked at him for a long moment. The truth, she said. That's all I'm expecting to find. She walked toward the barn before he could ask her anything else. Ethan watched her go. Hector appeared at his knee, looked up, then looked in the direction she'd gone. I know, Ethan said. The next morning arrived at 4:30, with the kind of heat that was already oppressive before the sun had properly cleared the horizon, and Clara was in the barn before any of the cowhands had rolled out of their bunks. Ethan found her there when he came down from the house. She was mucking stalls, the first two already done, working on the third, moving with an economy of motion that suggested she'd done this enough times that it didn't require thought anymore. Just the steady rhythm of work. She hadn't lit the lantern. She was working by the gray pre-dawn light that came through the gaps in the barn wall. You don't have to start before first light, he said. I know, she said without stopping. But this needs doing, and there's light enough, and I prefer being useful to standing around waiting to be useful. He watched her work. You really did grow up on a ranch, he said. I told you I did. Telling and showing aren't always the same thing. She stopped and looked at him over her shoulder. No, they're not. She went back to work. You should probably remember that. He didn't know if she meant it as a statement or a warning. I was starting to suspect it might be both. The cowhand's reception was exactly what Ethan had expected. Not hostile, not openly. His men weren't stupid enough for that. But there was a particular variety of smirking silence that moved through the bunkhouse at breakfast. A careful avoidance of direct speech. A set of pointed looks exchanged over coffee cups. The youngest of them, a 20-year-old kid from Texas named Roy Birch, who had an unfortunate amount of confidence for someone his age, made the first move just before noon. Clara was at the south pasture, helping one of the older hands replace a section of fence line. Roy came up on horseback, pulled up about 15 feet away, and looked down at her with the particular expression that young men use when they're performing for an audience they imagine is watching. Hey there, darlin', he said. You lost? Clara didn't look up from the post she was setting. No, she said. Only I don't recall seeing your name on the payroll. Then you might want to check again. Roy glanced at the older hand, a weathered, sensible man named George Pitts, who had worked the Lone Creek for 11 years and who was currently studying the fence post with great concentration. Roy looked back at Clara. This is men's work, Roy said. No offense meant, just saying. None taken, Clara said pleasantly. Hand me that wire stretcher, would you? She said it to George, who handed it over without a word. Roy watched her for a moment, waiting for some further reaction that didn't come. Then he wheeled his horse and rode off. George Pitts was quiet until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Boy's got the sense God gave a goat, he said finally. He's young, Clara said. So were we all, George said. Didn't stop us knowing how to behave. Clara stretched the wire, tested it, set the staple. How long have you been here? 11 years, George said. Knew Ethan's father. Good man. He paused. Not a perfect man, but good. Clara didn't respond to that. She moved to the next section of fence. George watched her sideways for a moment. You know the valley, he said. Some of it, she said. Long time ago. Thought so, George said. You've got the look of someone who's been here before and is trying to figure out how much it's changed. Clara kept working. Has it? She said. Changed. Some things, George said. Some things haven't changed one bit. By the end of the third day, Clara had finished the south fence line that had been sitting half-repaired for a week. Found and returned 4 stray cattle that had pushed through a gap in the north pasture the hands hadn't located yet. Reorganized the tack room in a way that made it possible to find things in the dark, and said not one unnecessary word to anyone. Roy Birch's smirk had started to develop some cracks. Del Purdy watched her from a distance in the quiet and methodical way. He watched everything and offered no opinion to anyone. But on the evening of the third day, he came to Ethan in the main house and stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands. She found the North Gap, Dell said. I know, Ethan said. Knew right where to look. Went straight there like she'd walked that fence line before. Maybe she has. Dell was quiet. She's looking for something, Dell said. Not just work. I know that too. And you're going to let her keep looking. It wasn't quite a question. Ethan set down the papers. He'd been reviewing figures that didn't add up the way they should have, money that kept going sideways in directions he couldn't account for, and looked at his foreman. Dell, he said. 3 of my fences have been cut in the last 2 months. 15 head of cattle have walked off this property and not come back. Somebody drove a nail through the main water line last week and tried to make it look like rust. I've got a banknote due in 60 days that I'm not going to be able to cover if those cattle don't turn up. He paused. And now, I've got a woman on my property named Bennett who says she's looking for the truth. Dell looked at him steadily. And maybe the truth is something I need too, Ethan said. Dell was quiet for a long time. Be careful, he said finally. That's all. I'm always careful. No, Dell said in the tone of a man who had known Ethan Walker since he was 17 years old. You're always controlled. That's not the same thing. He left. Ethan sat alone with the papers that didn't add up, and the sound of the summer night outside, and the knowledge, quiet and uncomfortable, that Dell Purdy was right. It was on the 5th night that he found her at the fence line after dark. He'd seen the lantern from the house and gone out on foot, not certain what he expected. What he found was Clara sitting on the top rail of the east fence with her lantern set on a post beside her, and a leather-bound journal open in her lap. She closed it when she heard him coming. But she didn't hide it. He stopped about 10 feet away. You should be sleeping, he said. So should you, she said. He looked at the journal. She looked at him, looking at it. It was my father's, she said. I carry it everywhere. I'm not... She paused. I'm not going to pretend I'm not here for reasons beyond ranch work. I think you already know that. I figured, he said. I'm not here to cause you trouble, she said. Whatever you may think. What are you here for then? Clara looked out over the dark land. The stars were enormous out here. That was one of the things that hadn't changed, and she'd noticed it the first night, the way the sky went on forever in every direction, the way you could feel how small and specific and temporary everything was beneath it. My father bought this land, she said. 30 years ago. He built the first structure on this property with his own hands. He ran cattle here for 8 years. She paused. And then one day a man came with papers that said the land had never been legally his. Said there'd been an error in the original filing. Said the title had reverted and the property was being sold. That man was my father, Ethan said. Yes. And you think he... I don't know what your father knew, Clara said. That's the truth. I don't know if he was cheated same as mine or if he was part of it. I don't know. All I know is that my father's name is on a filing in the territorial records that says he was the original and rightful owner of this land, and that filing disappeared from the county office in 1861, and nobody has ever explained where it went. Ethan was quiet. I have a copy, she said. I've had it for 5 years. I didn't come here to take this ranch from you. She met his eyes directly. I came here because someone told me the man living here might have documents, things his father left, that could tell me what really happened. And because... She stopped, looked away. Because whoever took my father's land is the same person who's been cutting your fences. That landed on Ethan like a flat stone dropped from a height. He was very still. What did you say? Victor Hayes, Clara said quietly. He orchestrated my father's removal from this land 30 years ago. He's been trying to acquire properties in this valley for decades. And 6 months ago, I found out that his men are the ones who've been interfering with Lone Creek's operations. The air between them was very still. How do you know that? Ethan said. Because one of Hayes's men told me, Clara said, before he thought better of it. She closed the journal. There's water under this land, Mr. Walker. A spring deep, substantial, more than enough to feed a cattle operation 3 times this size. Hayes found out about it 2 years ago. and he's been systematically trying to drive every landowner in this valley out of business so he can buy them up cheap. Ethan stared at her. The fence cuttings, the missing cattle, the water line, the numbers that didn't add up. Why didn't you just... He stopped, tried again. Why come here like this? Why not go to the law? Because Hayes owns the sheriff, Clara said flatly, and the county judge, and 2 of the 3 men at the territorial land office. She looked at him with those clear, direct eyes. The only people who can stop him are the ones whose names are on the deeds. But to fight him legally, I need the original documents, and I believe some of them are here, in this house, among your father's things. Ethan felt something moving through him. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something larger than either and harder to manage. You came to my ranch, he said slowly, injured on foot alone, asking for work so you could get close enough to search my house. Clara held his gaze. I came to your ranch, she said, because it's the only place left where the truth might still exist, and I asked for work because I don't ask for anything I'm not willing to earn. She paused. I should have told you this at the start, I know that, but I needed to know first whether you were part of it, or whether you were another person he'd wronged. And now, Ethan said, what do you think now? Clara looked at him for a long moment. I think you're a man who's been trying to hold something together that somebody else has been quietly taking apart, she said. And I think you deserve to know why. The lantern flickered in a breath of night wind. Somewhere in the dark pasture, a cow moved through dry grass with a steady, placid sound. Ethan Walker stood at the fence on his father's land, on land that might once have been something other than his father's, and looked at the woman sitting on the top rail with a dead man's journal in her lap, and the truth in her eyes, and he made a decision. Come to the house, he said. There are boxes in the back room that I've never opened. Been there since my father died. He looked at her steadily. If there's something in there, we'll find it together. Clara looked at him. Something moved through her expression. Something careful and guarded and almost hopeful, which was a combination he understood because he'd felt it himself once or twice and never trusted it. Why? She said. Why would you do that? Ethan picked up the lantern from the fence post and turned toward the house. Because 15 head of my cattle are gone, he said, and my water line has been sabotaged and my fences keep getting cut, and I'd like to know who's responsible before I lose what's left of this place. He started walking. After a moment, he heard her climb down from the fence, her boots on the dry ground following him. He didn't look back. But Hector, falling into step at his left knee, glanced over his shoulder once at the woman walking behind them through the dark and then looked forward again. The dog at least had apparently decided. The back room of the Lone Creek Ranch house was where everything went that had no other place to go. It had the particular quality of rooms that have been closed for a long time, the still air, the dust that lay undisturbed on every surface, the sense that time inside it had stopped at a specific moment and never resumed. Ethan had not been in this room in 3 years. He had not wanted to be. His father's things were stacked in 4 wooden crates against the far wall. He set the lantern on the workbench and looked at them. Clara came to stand beside him. She said nothing. She seemed to understand without being told that this was something that coming in here cost him something, and she gave him a moment with that. He appreciated it more than he would have said. His papers are in those 2, Ethan said, finally nodding at the right-hand crates. At least that's what Dell told me when we packed everything up. I didn't look through them at the time. I understand, Clara said. Do you need... I can do this myself, she said. If you'd rather not be here. He looked at her sideways. It's my house, he said. Yes, she said. It is. They opened the first crate together. It was past midnight when they found it. It was in the second crate near the bottom inside a leather document case that had been sealed with a wax stamp that crumbled when Clara touched it. Inside the case were papers, old yellowed at the edges, covered in the careful copperplate handwriting of a territorial land clerk from decades ago. Clara sat back on her heels on the floor and spread them out and read them by lantern light, and her hands were not quite steady. Ethan crouched across from her and watched her face. He'd been watching her face all evening in the way he watched things when he needed to understand them carefully, without appearing to cataloging what he saw. What he saw right now was something he recognized. A person finding out that what they'd believed was true was in fact true. "It's here," she said. Her voice was quiet and precisely controlled. "The original filing, my father's name, the acreage, the date of claim." She turned to the next page. "And here this is the letter, from the territorial office, acknowledging receipt of the filing and confirming validity." She looked up at him. "Whoever sold your father this land," she said, "did not have the legal authority to do so. The title had never actually cleared to them. Your father may have purchased in good faith, I believe he did, but the original claim was never properly extinguished." Ethan was quiet. "Which means," he said, "which means the land has been in legal limbo for 30 years, Clara said. "And Victor Hayes knows it. He's known it since he got access to the territorial records through his contacts. He's been waiting for the right moment to challenge both claims simultaneously so he can step in as the only party with clear title. Because he's the one who arranged for the records to be lost in the first place," Ethan said. Clara looked at him. "Yes," she said. "I believe so." Ethan looked at the papers on the floor between them. Then he looked up at the room around them, the room his father had used, the house his father had built, the land his father had worked for 2 decades. The land that a woman named Bennett's father had worked before that. I thought about the 14-year-old boy he'd been when his father brought him to this valley, thought about the years since, thought about what it meant to belong somewhere, and what it cost to lose it, and what was left of a man when the thing he'd built his life around turned out to have been standing on ground that wasn't solid. "So what do we do?" he said. Clara looked at the documents, then at him. "We take these to the territorial capital," she said. "There's a federal land commissioner there. I've already been in contact with him. He can't be bought by Hayes. And with these documents combined with the evidence I have about Hayes's interference with your operations, we may be able to make a case." "May," Ethan said. "It's the law," Clara said. "There are no certainties." He nodded slowly. "And if we succeed," he said, "what happens to this ranch?" Clara looked at him steadily. "That," she said, "is a conversation for when we've won." He held her gaze. For a moment, just a moment, something passed between them that was not about land or law or any of the practical things they'd been discussing. Something that didn't have words yet and wasn't looking for them. Then Clara began carefully gathering the documents, and Ethan Walker stood up and went to make coffee because it was going to be a long night and there was work to do, and that was something he understood how to deal with. Work. There was always work. And somewhere outside in the dark summer night, the land that had belonged to 2 fathers and was being contested by a third man, waited patient and indifferent and full of cold water, running deep underground for the living to decide what it was worth. The coffee was still hot when Clara found the second document case. She hadn't meant to keep looking. Ethan had gone to the kitchen, the lantern was burning low, and the sensible thing, the reasonable thing, was to organize what they'd already found and wait for morning. But her hands had kept moving. That was the thing about her hands. They didn't stop when her mind told them to. They'd been that way since she was 8 years old, sorting through her father's ledgers, while he slept trying to understand numbers that didn't make sense yet. The second case was thinner than the first. Older. The leather was dried almost to cracking along the spine. She opened it, and her breath stopped. It wasn't a land document. It wasn't a filing or a record or anything she'd been expecting. It was a letter. Handwritten. Dated June 14th, 1861. And the name at the bottom was not Hayes, was not Walker, was not any name she'd prepared herself to find. It was a name she recognized from her father's stories. A name he'd said once very late at night when he thought she was asleep in a voice that sounded like a man swallowing glass. She was still staring at it when Ethan came back with 2 cups of coffee. He stopped in the doorway. "What is it?" he said. Clara looked up at him. "Sit down," she said. "Please." He looked at her face. He set the cups on the workbench. He sat down on the crate across from her without another word, and she was grateful for that, for the fact that he seemed to understand already that there were moments when the most useful thing a person could do was simply stop moving and pay attention. She held the letter out to him. I took it, read it. His face, which was not an easy face to read under ordinary circumstances, went very still. In a way she was beginning to understand, meant the opposite of calm. "Do you know this name?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Who is he?" Ethan set the letter down on the floor between them, with the careful deliberateness of a man handling something he'd rather not touch. James Carver. He was the county land agent in 1861. He processed land transactions for the territorial government. He paused. He also worked for Victor Hayes. Clara felt the pieces locked together in her chest, like a mechanism she'd been assembling for years. "He forged the reversal notice," she said. "The document that said my father's claim was invalid. Carver created it on Hayes's behalf, and then your father." "My father bought the land from Hayes 6 months later," Ethan said, believing the title was clear. They looked at each other. "He was deceived," Clara said. "Yes." The word came out flat and certain. He was. Something moved through Ethan's expression, something complicated and old, the kind of thing a person carries for years without knowing exactly what to do with it. His father had been a hard man. Not unkind, but hard. The kind of man who didn't make mistakes easily and didn't forgive them in himself when he did. And now here was the evidence that the greatest thing his father had built his life around had been built on someone else's loss. He didn't know, Ethan said. It wasn't a question. It was something he was saying out loud because he needed to hear it in the air. "No," Clara said quietly. "I don't think he did." Ethan picked up his coffee, didn't drink it, set it down. "Your father," he said. "What happened to him?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "He tried to fight it, spent 3 years and every cent he had trying to prove the reversal was fraudulent. Nobody would listen. The judge was Hayes's man. The land agent was Hayes's man. Eventually he ran out of money and ran out of fight." She paused. "He died when I was 19. Not dramatically. He just stopped, like a fire going out when there's nothing left to burn." Ethan said nothing. She didn't want him to say anything. There was nothing useful to say. "I've been looking for these documents for 11 years, she said. "I knew they existed. I knew someone had to have copies somewhere because Carver was too careful a man to operate without a paper trail. He kept records of everything. It's what made him valuable to Hayes, and it's what eventually scared Hayes enough to—" She stopped. Ethan looked at her sharply. "What?" "Carver died in 1869, Clara said. "Fell from his horse, they said." She met Ethan's eyes. He was 41 years old and had been riding since he was a child. The silence in the room took on a different quality. "You think Hayes killed him," Ethan said. "I think Hayes has been doing what he needs to do for 30 years, Clara said. "And I think James Carver was a liability he eventually couldn't afford." She looked at the letter in Ethan's hand. "But Carver was careful. He made copies. He kept records. He hid them in places Hayes wouldn't think to look." She paused. "Like in the possession of the man who'd purchased the land because he knew Hayes would never suspect your father of having something that incriminated Hayes in the first place." Ethan stared at the letter. "My father never opened those crates," he said slowly. "He had a stroke 2 years before he died. Couldn't use his right side properly. He told me the back room was storage and He stopped. "I never went through it." "Carver must have sent it here before he died," Clara said. "As insurance. Or as I don't know. Maybe guilt. Maybe he wanted someone to eventually find it." "And no one did," Ethan said. "For 17 years. "Until tonight," Clara said. "Oh." They worked until 3 in the morning. Not talking mostly. Just working, spreading cross-referencing dates, building the kind of careful documented record that could stand up in front of a federal commissioner and not collapse under pressure. Clara had a system. She'd been developing it for years, and she moved through it now with the focused efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment so many times in her imagination that the reality of it felt almost familiar. Ethan worked beside her. He wasn't trained in legal documents, but he was methodical and thorough, and he caught two inconsistencies. She'd missed dates that didn't align a signature that appeared on two different documents in subtly different forms. "You have a good eye," she said around 2 in the morning. "I look at a lot of contracts," he said. "Cattle contracts, supply contracts, water rights agreements. You learn to read the fine print, or you lose money." "Has Hayes approached you directly?" she asked. "About selling?" Ethan's jaw tightened. 3 times. Last time was 4 months ago. Sent his lawyer with an offer that was about 40% of what this place is worth. "What did you say?" "I said if he sent his lawyer to my door again, I'd give him something to carry back that wasn't an envelope." Clara looked at him. "Diplomatically handled," she said. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but the closest thing she'd seen from him. It lasted approximately 1 second. "I'm not known for diplomacy," he said. "No," she said. "I'd gathered that." They went back to work. Dell found them at 5:30 in the morning. He came into the back room with his hat already on and stopped dead in the doorway, looking at the two of them sitting on the floor, surrounded by documents, with the particular dishevelment of people who hadn't slept and weren't thinking about it. He looked at Ethan, then at Clara, then at the papers. "Lord," he said. "We found the Carver letter," Ethan said. Dell came into the room slowly, like a man walking into something he'd been half expecting and half dreading for a long time. He crouched down and looked at the letter without touching it. "I knew your father had something," he said. "He told me the year before the stroke. Said there was something in the back room that he'd been meaning to deal with and hadn't gotten around to. I thought he meant old ranch records." He straightened up. "Didn't know it was this." "Did you know about the Bennett claim?" Clara asked. Dell looked at her directly for the first time. He had the steady assessing look of a man who made judgments carefully and rarely reversed them. "I knew the land had a history," he said. "I didn't know the specifics." He paused. "I know now you're not here to take what ain't yours. I know that much." Clara held his gaze. "No, I'm not." Dell looked at Ethan. "So what's the play?" "We ride to Cheyenne," Ethan said. "Federal Land Commissioner. Clara's already been in contact. We bring everything." "Hayes will find out," Dell said immediately. "Probably. He's got men watching the road out of the valley. Has for months. I didn't say anything because I couldn't prove it." Dell's voice was level and factual. "If you ride out with those documents and he finds out what you're carrying, you won't make it to the territorial line." The room was quiet. Clara looked at the documents spread across the floor. Years of searching. 11 years. Her father's name. James Carver's careful, guilty handwriting. The evidence that could bring down everything Hayes had built. "Then we don't ride," she said. "Not directly." Both men looked at her. "There's a mail coach that runs through Bitter Creek on Thursdays," she said. "It goes east before it goes north, different road than the main valley route. If we get the documents to Bitter Creek, and on that coach Hayes won't know until they're already in Cheyenne." She paused. "And if one of us rides to Cheyenne directly, separately, different timing to meet the commissioner in person, he can't stop the process without making his interference obvious to a federal officer." Dell looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the documents. "Thursday is 2 days away," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Which means 2 days of keeping this quiet," Ethan said. 2 days of Hayes not knowing what we found. 2 days of you going about your normal business," Clara said, "while I get these documents organized and packaged for the mail coach." Ethan looked at her. "You'd stay here alone with them." "I'm not exactly helpless," she said. "I know that," he said. And there was something in his voice, not quite an apology, but something adjacent to one that she noticed and filed away without comment. "But Hayes's men don't play careful. If they came here and found you, then it would be better," Dell said, cutting in with the practicality of a man who'd been solving logistics problems his whole life. "If Hayes's men thought everything on this property was normal, which means Miss Bennett works her regular shift same as the past 5 days, and we hide those documents somewhere they won't be found in a casual search." "There's a hollow in the floor of the tack room," Clara said. "Under the third plank from the east wall. I found it when I reorganized. Both men looked at her. I wasn't looking for it, she said with complete composure. The plank was loose. Dell made a sound that might in a different man have been the beginning of a laugh. Right, he said. The plank was loose. Ethan stood up. He moved to the window and looked out at the first gray light of morning on the land, on the dry grass and the fence lines and the barn, and all of it, everything he'd been holding together through sheer will for the past 2 years, while it quietly came apart around him. 2 days, he said. 2 days, Dell agreed. Ethan turned from the window. His eyes went to Clara briefly, just briefly, and she got the impression in that half second that there was something he wanted to say that he didn't know how to say. Or perhaps that he'd decided not to say it yet. Not until there was some other side of this to be standing on. Get some sleep, he said. A few hours at least. We've got a full day's work ahead of us, and I need you to look like everything's ordinary. I'm fine, Clara said. Miss Bennett, he said with a particular patience that suggested he was not a man accustomed to having to repeat himself. You have been awake for approximately 22 hours, and you are going to need to be clear-headed for the next 2 days. A few hours of sleep is not weakness. It is operational good sense. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Fine, she said. She gathered her father's journal that she kept on her person and left the rest carefully stacked for Ethan to move to the tack room. At the door she paused and looked back. Mr. Walker, she said. Ethan, he said without looking up from the documents. She hesitated one beat. Ethan, what you're doing helping me with this, you don't owe me anything. I came here under false pretenses. I want you to know that I understand what this costs you. He looked up then. His eyes were very steady and very tired and entirely direct. My father didn't cheat your father, he said. But your father lost something because of a lie somebody told mine. That's not nothing. A pause. And somebody's been cutting my fences and running off my cattle, and I'd like them to stop. Another pause, shorter. Go sleep, Miss Bennett. She almost corrected him on the name. She didn't. She went. The next day was the longest Ethan Walker could remember in recent years, which was saying something given the year he'd been having. He rode his normal lines, checked his normal fences, had his normal conversations with his men, said his normal words to the hands who needed direction, made his normal decisions about the 23 things that needed deciding on any given day on a working cattle ranch in Wyoming territory. And all of it felt like a performance, because he kept thinking about what was under the third plank from the east wall of the tack room. And he kept watching the road. And he kept watching Roy Birch, who was young and talkative, and occasionally supplemented his pay in ways Ethan had suspected for 6 months, but never been able to prove. Roy rode out at noon on an errand Ethan hadn't assigned him. Ethan sent George Pitts to follow him at a distance. George came back an hour later with a face that said everything before his mouth did. He went to the Bellamy Road, George said quietly, under the pretense of showing Ethan a piece of fence hardware. Met a rider, didn't stay long, exchange was brief. Hayes's man. Didn't recognize him, but his horse had a Rocking H brand. Rocking H was Hayes's operation. Ethan looked across the yard at Roy Birch, who had returned and was now sitting on the corral fence, eating an apple with complete apparent ease. 20 years old. Supplemental income. And now Ethan knew from whom. He did not go to Roy. Not yet. Not until those documents were on the mail coach and a day's ride away from here. Until then, Roy Birch needed to continue believing that everything on the Lone Creek was ordinary. It was the hardest thing Ethan Walker had done in a long time. Harder than he'd expected. He was not a man who found dissembling comfortable. He went to the barn instead, and he found Clara there. She was working with the horse, a young bay gelding that had been fractious since the spring, running through cow hands like they were suggestions rather than authority. She was in the pen with him, not chasing, not forcing, just standing in the center of the space and letting the animal do what it needed to do, moving only slightly to maintain her position as the axis around which the horse moved. Ethan stopped at the fence. He watched for a good 2 minutes without speaking. The horse slowed, came slightly closer. Clara didn't move toward it. She just waited. The horse came closer still, stopped, stretched its neck out and touched her shoulder with its nose cautious testing, and when she didn't move, it settled. She reached up slowly and put her hand on its jaw. "You've worked with green horses before," Ethan said. She looked over her shoulder at him. "My father couldn't always afford trained animals." She kept her voice quiet so the horse wouldn't startle. "You learn patience or you learn bruises?" "Which did you learn?" "Both," she said. "But patience sticks better." He leaned against the fence rail. Roy Birch met a rocking H-rider on the Bellamy Road at noon. Her hand on the horse didn't pause. But something in her shoulders changed, a tension she controlled immediately. "How long has he been working for Hayes?" "I don't know. Long enough." Ethan kept his voice level. "I won't move on him until the documents are gone. If he knows I've made him, he'll send word before I can stop him." "Agreed," she said. "After Thursday," he said, "he and I are going to have a conversation." Something in his voice made the bay horse's ears flick back momentarily. Clara steadied it with the pressure of her hand. "Just a conversation," she said. "To start," Ethan said. She nodded. She led the horse in a slow circle, quiet and unhurried. "My father had a man like that once," she said. "Someone he trusted who was reporting back to Hayes. He never found out who it was, but he always said that was what broke him more than anything. Not losing the land. The idea that someone he'd treated fairly had looked at everything he'd built and decided it was worth less than what Hayes was paying." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "What makes a man do that?" "Fear mostly," Clara said. "Fear that they're on the losing side, and they'd rather get out than go down with it." She looked at him. "It's not so different from any other calculation people make. It's just that the cost falls on someone else." Ethan looked at Roy Birch across the yard, at the easy way he sat, the comfortable way he occupied space on a property he'd been systematically undermining. "It's going to be fine," Clara said. Not reassurance exactly, more like a statement of intent. He looked at her. "You don't know that," he said. "No," she agreed. "But I've been working toward this for 11 years, and I've had it fall apart on me more times than I can count, and I'm still here." She held his gaze steadily. "So I choose to operate as though it's going to be fine, because the alternative is not a thing I'm interested in." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "Your father raised you," he said. It wasn't a question. "Mostly," she said. "My mother died when I was 4. "Mine too," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. It was only a second. But it was the kind of second that changes the quality of the space between two people. Something acknowledged, something recognized, something that doesn't require elaboration. He pushed off the fence rail. "I'm going to ride the north line," he said. "Act normal." "I'll finish with the horse," she said. He started to walk away. "Ethan," she said. He turned. "Roy Birch didn't see the documents," she said. "He doesn't know what we found. All he knows is what he observed, which is 2 people working late in the ranch house. That's not enough to tell Hayes anything actionable." She paused. "We still have the advantage." He held her gaze. "Don't let him take it," she said. He turned and walked toward his horse, and the afternoon heat pressed down on the yard like a hand on a shoulder, and somewhere on the Bellamy Road, a rider with a rocking H brand was carrying information that wasn't enough, not yet, to undo what was hidden under the 3rd plank from the east wall. Not yet. Thursday came the way. Important days always do too quickly, and not quickly enough. The morning started before light. Clara had the documents wrapped in oilcloth and packed inside an ordinary grain sack, the kind that moved through ranch properties every day without attracting attention. Dell would take them to Bitter Creek on the regular Thursday supply run, which he made every week, which Hayes's watchers had seen him make enough times that it registered as background and nothing more. Clara stood in the barn doorway and handed Dell the sack. He took it with both hands, weighed it for a moment, looked at her. "Your father's name is in here," he said. "Yes," she said. "It's going to be all right, Miss Bennett," he said. "I've known Ethan Walker since he was 17 years old, and I've never once seen him start something he didn't finish. This isn't just his fight, she said. No, Dell agreed. But having him in it is better than not. He tucked the sack into the supply wagon with the easy carelessness of a man who'd been doing this for years. You going to be all right here while we're gone? I'll be fine, she said. Dell nodded, climbed up to the wagon bench. Dell, she said. He looked down. Thank you, she said, for not asking me to prove I belonged here before you helped me. Dell looked at her for a moment. Girl, he said in the gruff, undemonstrative way of a man who wasn't built for sentiment, but occasionally got ambushed by it. The way you worked this place for 5 days is proof enough for any man with eyes in his head. He picked up the reins. I'll be back before dark. He drove out. Clara stood in the barn doorway and watched the wagon until it turned onto the main road and disappeared behind the tree line. Then she stood there a little longer in the way a person stands when they've just let go of something they've been holding for a very long time, and they're not yet sure what their hands are supposed to do next. She heard Ethan come up behind her. I didn't say anything immediately. He came to stand beside her in the doorway, looking at the empty road, one shoulder leaning against the frame. It's done, she said. It started, he said. She looked at him sideways. Is there a difference? Once you start something like this, you can't stop it, so yes. He pushed off the doorframe. Come on, we've got work to do. She followed him, and Roy Birch, watching from across the yard, saw nothing more interesting than a rancher and a hired hand walking toward the fence line in the early morning sun. The trouble started at 2:30 in the afternoon, not from the direction Ethan had expected. He was at the north pasture gate when he heard the horse coming at a pace that meant urgency, and he turned to see George Pitts riding hard from the direction of the main road. George pulled up in a cloud of dust. His face was tight. Rider came through town this morning, George said without preamble. Stopped at the general store, asked questions about the Lone Creek, specifically about new hires, about a woman. Every muscle in Ethan's body went cold and still. Hayes knows she's here, he said. Sounds like someone told him, George said. Sooner than Roy's information would have gotten to him. Someone else, Ethan said. George nodded. Ryder's heading this way, 2, maybe 3 hours back. He wasn't alone. Ethan looked across at the pasture. Thought about Clara. Thought about the documents that were if everything had gone right already on the Bitter Creek mail coach heading east. How many, he said. Store owner thought 4, George said. Ethan made his decision in approximately 2 seconds. Find Clara. Get her to the house. Tell her to stay inside and not come out for anything until I come for her personally. You understand me? Yes, sir. And George. Ethan caught the older man's eye. Don't let Roy Birch see where she goes. George Pitts looked at him for a moment, the kind of look that says, I've suspected that for a while, and I'm sorry you're right. Then he turned his horse and rode. Ethan stood at the north pasture gate in the hammering afternoon sun. 4 riders, 2 to 3 hours, and somewhere east of here on a mail coach heading toward Cheyenne, a sack of oilcloth-wrapped documents that represented 30 years of theft and silence, and a dead man's careful handwriting. He looked out at the valley, at the grass and the sky and the land that had belonged to 2 fathers and was being fought for by their children. He thought about what Clara had said. We still have the advantage. Don't let him take it. He went to find his rifle. Clara was in the house sitting at the kitchen table when Ethan came in. George had clearly delivered the message with full seriousness because she was not frightened. Or if she was, she'd arranged herself so it didn't show. But she was alert in the particular way of someone who has processed information and is now working out what to do about it. She looked up when he came in. 4 riders, she said. Yes. Hayes's men. Yes. The documents are 2 hours ahead of them, she said. If Dell made Bitter Creek by noon, he made it, Ethan said. Dell's never missed a supply run in 11 years. Clara nodded, looked at her hands on the table, then up at him. What do they want? She said. If they already know the documents are gone. They may not know that yet, Ethan said. All they know is Hayes told them to find the woman named Bennett and bring her to him. He set his rifle on the table. which they're not going to do. Clara looked at the rifle, then at him. "You'd fight them for me," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'd fight them for my property," Ethan said. "You happen to be on it." She looked at him for a moment. "You're not a very good liar," she said quietly. The kitchen was very still. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed against the windows, and somewhere on the main road, 4 men with rocking H-brands on their horses were getting closer with every minute, and the documents were east, and the law was in Cheyenne, and the only thing standing between Victor Hayes and everything he wanted were a woman with 11 years of patience, and a man who'd just discovered that the land beneath his feet had 2 histories. "Stay in the house," Ethan said. "Whatever you hear." "Ethan. Clara." He said her name for the first time. Just that. Just her name. She stopped. He held her gaze. "Trust me," he said. She looked at him, at the steadiness of him, at the particular quality of stillness he had that she'd been trying to name for 5 days and suddenly recognized. It was the stillness of someone who had already decided, who didn't waste energy on deciding twice. "All right," she said. He picked up his rifle and walked out the front door, and Clara Bennett sat at the kitchen table of what might or might not be her father's house, with her hands flat on the wood and her eyes on the door, and she waited. They came in the late afternoon when the sun was still high enough to be merciless. Ethan heard them before he saw them. 4 sets of hoofbeats on the dry road, unhurried, the particular rhythm of men who weren't worried about being heard because they didn't think they needed to be. He was standing on the porch when they came through the gate, and he didn't move toward them, and he didn't move away. He just stood there with his rifle in the crook of his arm and let them come to him. The man who rode in front was not someone Ethan recognized. He was somewhere in his 40s, heavy through the shoulders, with a face that had spent a long time outdoors and not been improved by the experience. He wore a rocking H badge on his vest, not a lawman's badge, just Hayes's brand rendered in brass, which was exactly the kind of thing Hayes would think of, and exactly the kind of thing that meant nothing legally. The man pulled up 10 feet from the porch steps. The 3 behind him spread out slightly, the way men do when they've done this before, and know what the geometry of the situation is supposed to look like. Ethan noted the spread, noted their hands. "Walker," the man said. Not a question. "That's right," Ethan said. "I'm looking for a woman, goes by the name Bennett. We have information she's been working this property." "You have information," Ethan said. "That's what I said." "Well." Ethan shifted his weight very slightly, unhurried, just enough to be comfortable. "I appreciate you sharing that with me. Information's a valuable thing." The man's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected easy. He'd expected argument or fear, or the specific kind of bluster that scared men produce. He wasn't getting any of those things, and it was making him uncertain, which was exactly what Ethan intended. "Is she here or not?" the man said. "This is private property," Ethan said. "You rode through my gate without an invitation. That's a thing I notice." "Mr. Hayes has an interest in speaking with the woman." "Mr. Hayes," Ethan said in a tone that made it clear what he thought of Mr. Hayes and his interests, "can come speak with me himself if he's got business at the Lone Creek. He knows the way." The man looked at him, looked at the 3 men with him, looked back at Ethan. "We'll have a look around," he said, "just to be sure." "No," Ethan said. "You won't." The word landed with a weight that was out of proportion to its size. The man's hand moved not toward his gun, not quite just a shift of intention, and Ethan's rifle came up off his arm in the same instant, smooth and without drama, and rested where it could be seen clearly by all 4 of them. "You're on my land," Ethan said. "I have asked you once to state your business and once to leave. I don't generally ask a 3rd time." The silence stretched. From around the corner of the barn, George Pitts appeared with a shotgun. From the bunkhouse doorway, 2 more of the hands materialized, not moving, just present. The 4 riders looked at the geometry of the situation, and it had changed. The lead man pulled his horse back a step. "Just one. Just enough. Hayes isn't going to be pleased," he said. "I expect not," Ethan said. "You tell him Ethan Walker sends his regards." They left. Ethan watched them through the gate and down the road until the dust settled. Then he lowered the rifle and breathed out, once a slow, controlled exhale. That was the only concession he made to the fact that his heart had been beating considerably harder than his face suggested. George came to stand beside him. "They'll be back," George said. "I know," Ethan said. "With more men." "Probably." "And then what?" Ethan looked at the road. "Then we'd better hope the commissioner in Cheyenne moves faster than Hayes does," he said. Clara was still at the kitchen table when he came inside. She'd heard everything. The voices, the standoff, the hoofbeats leaving. He could tell from the way she was sitting that she'd been listening so hard she'd barely breathed, and now that it was over, she was processing the particular physical aftermath of controlled fear, which is something very different from the feeling of it. She looked at him when he came in. "They're gone," he said. She nodded. Her hands on the table were steady, but only because she was making them steady. "They'll come back," she said. "Yes. With more authority, or more men, or both." She looked at the window. "Hayes is going to know by tomorrow morning that we found something. Roy Birch has been watching this house for days. He saw us working in the back room. He saw Dell leave with the wagon. He'll put it together." "Roy Birch and I had a conversation about an hour ago," Ethan said. Clara looked at him sharply. "He's gone," Ethan said. "I paid him what I owed him and told him to find another place to be, and that if I saw him on this property again, I'd consider it trespassing. He'll go straight to Hayes." "He will," Ethan agreed. "Which is why I need you to tell me how quickly the commissioner in Cheyenne can move. Because we bought ourselves a day, maybe two, and I need to know if that's enough." Clara stood up from the table. She went to the window, not to look out, just to move to let the restlessness that had been building in her have somewhere to go. "Commissioner Aldridge is a federal officer," she said. "Once he receives those documents and my accompanying letter, he has the authority to freeze any land transaction in the territory pending review. Hayes can't legally proceed with any acquisition while a federal inquiry is open." She paused. "But he has to receive them first, and he has to act. And men in positions of authority sometimes." "Aldridge," Ethan said. "You trust him?" Clara turned to look at him. "I've been corresponding with him for 3 months. He's the only official in this territory who hasn't been bought or threatened into silence. I believe he's honest." She paused. "I have to believe that, because if he's not, there is no legal path left." Ethan looked at her. "And if there's no legal path," he said. She met his eyes directly. "Then we make noise," she said. "We go to every newspaper in the territory. We write to the federal land office in Washington. We make what Hayes has done so visible and so documented that he can't continue without the whole country." "Months," Ethan said. "Yes," she said quietly. "It might." He was quiet for a moment. "And in the meantime," he said, "he keeps cutting fences and running off cattle and trying to drive this place under." Clara held his gaze without flinching. "Yes, I won't lie to you about what this looks like." He nodded slowly. Not defeat, just the particular acknowledgement of a man who has looked at hard facts before and is doing it again. "All right," he said. "Then we hold." She looked at him for a moment. "You'd do that," she said. "Hold. Even knowing it might cost you more cattle, more losses." "What's the alternative? Give Hayes what he wants." "Some men would," she said. "Some men aren't me," he said. Clara looked at him for a long moment, at the simple, unhesitating way he said it, at the absence of drama in it, at the way conviction sat in him like something structural rather than something performed. She thought about what George Pitts had said to her on the second day. He never starts something he doesn't finish. She thought her father would have liked Ethan Walker. She thought that, and then she put it away, because it was the kind of thought that softened things, and she didn't have the luxury of soft things yet. "I'll write to Aldridge tonight," she said. "A second letter letting him know about Hayes's interference and the visit from his men. Documentation of everything." "I'll have one of the boys ride it to the Bitter Creek post office at first light," Ethan said. "Different route than Dell took." "Good," she said. They looked at each other across the kitchen in the long afternoon light. Two people who had agreed to hold a line together without entirely discussing what that meant, or why they were both so willing to do it, and the question of why hung in the air between them, like smoke present impossible to ignore, not quite ready to be addressed. Clara picked up her father's journal from the table. "I should let you eat," she said. "You should eat too," he said. "I'll manage." Clara. Her name again, the way he'd said it before, just the name, just that particular weight on it. "Sit down and eat. You are not going to be useful to anyone if you run yourself into the ground." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted the smallest thing, barely visible, the almost yield of a person who has been taking care of themselves alone for so long that being told to stop is disorienting. She sat down. He put food on the table. They ate in silence that was not somehow uncomfortable. The second twist came the next morning, and it came from the direction neither of them had been watching. Del Purdy came back from Bitter Creek at mid-morning earlier than expected. He came in at a pace that wasn't quite urgency, but wasn't the easy return of a completed errand either. And when he found Ethan in the barn, he pulled him aside with the careful discretion of a man who's learned over decades that news has its own proper timing and place. "Documents are on the coach," Del said. "They're moving. That part's done." "But," Ethan said, because there was clearly a but. "But in Bitter Creek at the general store I ran into Martin Cross." He paused. "You know him?" "Cross, attorney, works out of the county seat." Ethan's voice had gone very flat. "Hayes's attorney. I was asking about deed records," Del said. Specifically, he was asking about whether anyone had recently come into possession of documents relating to land claims in the Lone Creek Valley. Del's eyes were steady and serious. He was also asking about the Bennett estate claim, by name. Ethan stared at him. "Hayes already knows," Ethan said. "Sounds like it. Or he suspects enough to be moving legally." Del paused. "Cross was filing papers at the county recorder's office when I left. I didn't see what papers." Ethan turned away, took 2 steps toward the barn door, stopped. Hayes was moving on 2 tracks simultaneously. Muscle on the road and attorneys in the county office, which meant he knew or suspected that the documents existed and that time was no longer on his side. He was trying to establish a competing legal claim before Aldridge in Cheyenne could open an inquiry. "How fast can he file something at the county level?" Ethan said. "Fast," Del said. "Today maybe. County recorder is Hayes's man," Ethan said. "I know. If he files a renewed title claim today, even a fraudulent one, it creates a legal dispute that could take months to untangle, even with federal involvement." Del paused. "And in the meantime you can't sell, can't borrow against the land, can't." "I know what it means," Ethan said. He stood there for a moment. Just a moment. Then he walked out of the barn and toward the house with the particular stride of a man who has made a decision and is walking toward its consequences. Clara looked up from the kitchen table when he came in. She had papers spread in front of her, her own documentation carefully organized, and she read his face before he spoke. "What happened?" she said. He told her, all of it. Del's report, Cross at the recorder's office, Hayes moving on 2 fronts. She listened without interrupting. Her face didn't change. Or rather, it changed in the way a person's face changes when they're managing something significant and choosing not to let it show. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He's trying to create a legal mess," she said. "Even if Aldridge opens an inquiry, if there's an existing county-level claim, it gives Hayes's lawyers something to fight with. Delays, appeals, procedural arguments." She looked at the papers in front of her. "He doesn't have to win. He just has to make the process long enough and expensive enough that you can't sustain this place while it's happening." "Can he do it?" Ethan said. "At the county level, yes. With the recorder in his pocket and cross-filing, yes." She met his eye. "Which is why what I'm about to tell you matters more than I realized when I was planning this." He sat down across from her. She opened her father's journal, the one she carried everywhere, and turned to a page near the back. She set it on the table and turned it so he could see. "My father," she said, "was a thorough man, more thorough than Victor Hayes ever gave him credit for being." When Carver came to him with the reversal notice, my father didn't just fight it in court. He documented everything. Every conversation, every transaction, every date, every name. She tapped the page. Including the name of the county recorder in 1861, who signed off on the fraudulent reversal claim. Ethan looked at the page. The current county recorder, Clara said, is that man's son. He took over his father's office 15 years ago. And his father's signature is on a document that proves the 1861 reversal was fraudulent. A slow, cold understanding moved through Ethan. Which means the current recorder, he said, has personal reason to make sure that document is never validated. Yes, Clara said. It means he's not just Hayes's man because Hayes pays him. He's Hayes's man because if the truth comes out, his father's legacy comes with it. She paused. He will do anything Hayes asks him to do, because the alternative is his family name attached to a fraud. And you've known this, Ethan said slowly. I've suspected it for 2 years, she said. The journal gave me confirmation. She looked at him directly. This is why the county level can never be where we win this. It's why Aldridge matters. It's why the federal commissioner is the only path. Ethan looked at her. You came here knowing all of this, he said. Knowing Hayes controlled the county office. Knowing Roy Birch or someone like him might be watching. Knowing they might send men. Yes, she said. And you came anyway, alone. I didn't have anyone to come with, she said simply. The simplicity of it hit him somewhere undefended. She hadn't said it for effect. She hadn't said it to make him feel anything. She'd said it the way a person states a logistical fact: I needed to get somewhere, and this was the only road available. I thought about 11 years. He thought about what it looked like, a woman alone carrying a dead man's journal and a copy of a document that everyone in authority wanted to disappear, moving toward the only place where the truth might still exist. He thought about what that cost. And he thought that she had never once in 5 days on his ranch indicated that it had cost her anything at all. Why didn't you ask anyone for help? He said. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the journal. The last person I asked for help, she said, was the county sheriff in Douglas, 3 years ago. I sat in his office and I showed him what I had and I asked him to investigate. She paused. He took my copies and walked me to the door and told me to go home and stop causing trouble. Another pause shorter. 2 weeks later, the man who'd been helping me gather evidence was found with his leg broken in 3 places on the road outside of town. It was described as a riding accident. The kitchen was very quiet. After that, Clara said, I stopped asking. Ethan looked at her. At the composed, careful surface of her. At the thing underneath it that she'd been carrying for a long time without putting down. And now, he said. She met his eyes. Now I'm telling you, she said. Because you asked. And because you already know too much for it to make a difference. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, but something close to one. And because you seem like someone who is going to be involved in this, regardless of what I tell you. I am, he said. I know, she said. They looked at each other across the table with the journal and the papers and the evidence of 30 years between them. So, Ethan said. County level is compromised. Hayes is filing. Aldridge has the documents but hasn't moved yet. Hayes's men know you're here and they'll be back. He paused. What we need is to slow Hayes down at the county level long enough for Aldridge to act. Is there anything that could do that? Clara looked at the journal. She turned back a few pages. Stopped. Yes, she said. Possibly. She looked up. But I need someone to ride to the county seat today, right now. Who? I need someone Hayes hasn't identified, she said. Someone who can walk into the county recorder's office without raising suspicion and file a formal request for a record review on behalf of an interested party. That would delay Cross's filing, Ethan said. It would create a procedural obligation to respond, Clara said. A record review request from a named interested party has to be acknowledged within 5 business days under territorial statute. During that time, they can't finalize the competing claim without the review on record. She paused. It won't stop Hayes permanently, but it buys Aldridge time. Who files the request? Ethan said. It needs to be someone with a documented interest in the property, Clara said. Legally, that's either you or me. She paused. If I show up at the county recorder's office, they'll know immediately. And the man behind that desk will do everything in his power to ensure I never leave with anything useful. So I go, Ethan said. You go, she said. And you file under your name as the current deed holder, requesting a full historical record review of the Lone Creek title chain. She turned to a clean page in her journal and began writing. I'll write out the exact language. You copy it in your hand, and you present it as your own request. It's entirely legal. You have every right as the deed holder to request this. She wrote quickly, efficiently, without hesitation. If they refuse to accept it, you note the refusal aloud in front of witnesses if possible, and you come back here. And if they accept it, then we just bought Aldridge the time he needs. She tore the page out carefully and held it out to him. Can you ride to the county seat and back before dark? Ethan looked at the page, at the careful, precise handwriting that had clearly been trained to be legible under pressure. He stood up. I can, he said. Take George, she said. Not for protection for the witness. Agreed. He took his hat off the hook by the door. You'll be all right here. It was not quite a question, and not quite an order. It was somewhere in between the particular register of a man checking a fact he already believes to be true, but needs confirmed. I'll be all right, she said. He looked at her once more. Then he walked out the door, and she heard him calling for George across the yard, and the sounds of preparation horses' equipment, the brief low exchange of men getting ready to move quickly. Clara sat alone at the kitchen table with her father's journal and the quiet of the house around her, and she allowed herself for exactly 30 seconds to feel the full weight of everything she was carrying. All of it. The years, the cost, the people who had helped her and paid for it. Her father dying by degrees in a rented room in a town that wasn't his. The journal she'd read so many times, the binding was giving way. The moment in this back room 3 nights ago, when she'd found the letter and her hands had not been entirely steady. 30 seconds. Then she straightened her back, picked up her pen, and began writing her second letter to Commissioner Aldridge. Ethan came back at dusk. She heard his horse in the yard, and she was at the door before he reached the porch. He looked tired in the specific, functional way of a man who'd pushed hard and gotten something done, and hadn't stopped to feel it yet. They accepted it, he said. Clara closed her eyes for 1 second. Cross was there, Ethan said. He saw me file. He wasn't pleased. What did he say? Nothing to me directly, but I watched him walk outside afterward and send a rider out, and I'll give you 3 guesses where that rider was headed. Hayes, she said. Hayes, he confirmed. Then Hayes knows by now that someone is contesting his filing, Clara said. He knows it came from you. He knows you're not a passive target anymore. He's known that since his men left here yesterday, Ethan said. This just confirms it. Clara nodded, looked at him. You filed under your own name, she said. That means Hayes now has a legal reason to come after your deed directly. I know, Ethan said. That's... She stopped. Ethan, that increases your personal risk considerably. If he can challenge your title before Aldridge acts... Clara, he said. She stopped. I've been holding this land against Hayes for 2 years, he said with the simple, weathered certainty of a man who has already done his accounting. He's been winning. Slow, but he's been winning. Now we have something to fight with. He looked at her steadily. I'm not backing off because it got harder. She looked at him. Your father, she said quietly, must have been a very good man. Ethan looked away briefly at the darkening yard at the first stars appearing low on the horizon. He made mistakes, he said. So do all of them, she said. The good ones and the other kind both. He looked back at her. Something moved between them in that moment. Something that had been building for days in kitchens and fence lines and late nights, and the accumulated weight of trust given and tested and held. Something that neither of them had found the right words for. Yet partly because the situation hadn't allowed for words, and partly because some things require a person to be standing on solid ground before they can say them. Neither of them was standing on solid ground yet. Get inside, he said. It's cooling down." She almost said something. She went inside instead. The letter from Commissioner Aldridge arrived the following morning. It arrived not through the mail, too slow, too visible, but by personal rider, a federal courier who came to the Lone Creek gate at 10 in the morning and asked for Clara Bennett by name. She was standing right there. She took the envelope with hands that were steadier than they felt. She opened it. She read it once. Then she looked up at Ethan, who was standing 6 feet away and watching her face the way he always did when he needed to know something important. "He received the documents," she said. "He's opening an inquiry." Ethan was very still. "He's issued a temporary freeze," she said, "on all land transactions in the Lone Creek Valley pending federal review." She looked up fully. "Hayes can't file. Cross's claim is suspended. Nothing moves until Aldridge completes his review." The yard was very quiet. George Pitts, who had come out of the barn when the federal rider arrived, let out a breath that seemed to come from some considerable depth. "Lord Almighty," he said. "It's not over," Clara said immediately. "A freeze isn't a decision. Hayes will fight it. His lawyers will challenge the inquiry jurisdiction. This is the beginning of a legal process, not the end." She looked at Ethan. But he can't take the land while it's under federal review," Ethan said. "Not legally," she said. "And Hayes, for all his ruthlessness, has always operated through legal mechanisms. He corrupts the process. He doesn't break it openly." She folded the letter. "Which means as long as the inquiry is open, we have protection." Ethan looked at the letter in her hand. Then he looked at her. "You did that," he said. "We did that," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You carried those documents for 11 years. You found this place. You found the Carver letter. You reached Aldridge." He paused. "I just filed a form at the county seat." "You wrote out when it counted," she said. "Don't minimize that." He looked at her. And in that moment, standing in the yard of the Lone Creek Ranch, with a federal freeze order in her hand, and the morning sun hammering down, and George Pitts trying very hard to look like he wasn't watching the two of them, Clara Bennett understood that something had changed. Not in the situation that was still complicated, still fragile, still requiring more work and more time and more of everything they had. But in the space between herself and Ethan Walker, something had shifted in a way she hadn't exactly planned for. She had come here with a purpose. She had accomplished a significant part of it. And somewhere in the doing of it, she had stopped thinking of this land as something to be reclaimed and started thinking of it as something to be protected. That was the thing she hadn't expected. She hadn't expected to want to stay. She looked at the letter in her hand, at the Lone Creek Ranch house behind Ethan's shoulder, at the land that had belonged to 2 fathers and was now for the moment legally inviolable. "I should write to Aldridge," she said. "Confirm receipt and provide additional supporting material." "You should," he said. She turned toward the house. "Clara," he said. She turned back. He had his hat in his hand. He'd taken it off at some point, which she noted because he didn't do that without reason. "When this is over," he said, "however it comes out." He paused. "I'd like to have a conversation." She looked at him. "About the land," she said carefully. "Among other things," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. "When it's over." She walked back to the house, and she did not let herself think about what that conversation might contain, because thinking about it was a luxury she couldn't afford yet, and because the part of her that had been careful for 11 years was still watching every door. But walking across the yard with the federal letter in her hand, and the morning sun on her back, and the sound of Ethan Walker's boots on the porch steps behind her, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like she might be winning. And then she stepped inside, and she found the envelope on the kitchen table. It had not been there when she left. Someone had put it there while they were all standing in the yard. She picked it up. Her name was on the front, written in a hand she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. 4 words: "Leave or lose everything." She stood in the kitchen of the Lone Creek Ranch house, with a federal freeze order in one hand and a threat in the other, and she understood that Hayes had been in this house, or one of his people had. While they were all in the While the federal writer had their attention, someone had walked through the back door and left this on the table. Which meant Hayes had known about the writer before the writer arrived. Which meant Hayes had a source inside the federal courier system. She turned slowly and looked at the back door, which was closed but not latched, and at the window above the sink, which was open 2 inches exactly as she'd left it that morning. Then she called for Ethan. Not loudly, not with panic, just his name clear and direct through the open front door. He was in the kitchen in 12 seconds. She held out the note. He read it. His face went through several things very quickly, none of them good. He was in this house, Ethan said. Or his man was, Clara said. While we were all outside. Ethan looked at the back door. He knew about Aldridge's writer, Clara said. Hayes has someone inside the federal system, or at the minimum, someone watching the roads who recognized a federal courier and sent word ahead. Ethan set the note on the table. This changes things, he said. Yes, Clara said. He's not just playing legal games anymore, Ethan said. He walked into my house. He wants me frightened, Clara said. He wants me to run. Are you? He said. And there was something in the way he asked it. Not a challenge, not a test, just a direct and genuine question from a man who had learned to take her seriously. Clara looked at the note, at her father's name in the journal on the table, at the federal letter in her hand. No, she said. I'm not. Good, Ethan said. He picked up the note, folded it once. This goes to Aldridge, he said. This is harassment of a party to a federal inquiry. That's a crime. Yes, Clara said. It is. Their eyes met. Outside, the Wyoming summer pressed down on the land, and somewhere beyond the valley, Victor Hayes was reading his attorney's report and calculating his next move, and the ground beneath the Lone Creek Ranch held its cold water and its old secrets, and waited as land always waits for the living to finish deciding who it belonged to. Clara Bennett picked up her pen. She had a letter to write. The letter to Aldridge was finished by noon. Clara wrote it in the careful, precise language she'd taught herself over 11 years of correspondence with people who needed evidence before they would believe anything, who needed dates and names and documented facts arranged in a sequence that left no room for reasonable doubt. She described the note, the method of entry, the timing relative to the federal courier's arrival. She used the word intimidation once deliberately because it was the correct legal term and because she wanted Aldridge to see it in writing. Ethan read it before she sealed it. He read it the way he read everything quietly, completely, without expression, until he was finished. Then he set it on the table. You write like a lawyer, he said. I've had to, she said. That's not a criticism. He looked at the letter. It's good. It's better than good. He paused. Send it with 2 writers. Separate routes. Different timing. She looked at him. If Hayes has someone watching the main road, he said, 1 letter gets through. She nodded. Yes, you're right. I'll have George and Thomas ride within the hour. He stood. Different departure times. George goes north first, comes around through the creek trail. Thomas takes the south road like he's heading to town for supplies. And the note itself, she said. The one Hayes left. Goes with George, original. Aldridge needs to see the actual paper, not a copy. He picked up his hat. I'll be back in 20 minutes. He left. She sat with the sealed letter and listened to the yard sounds. His voice. George's answer. Answer the sounds of horses being saddled, and thought about the word intimidation, and how inadequate it was for what Victor Hayes had actually done to her family over 30 years. But adequate was enough. Adequate was what the law required. She thought about that, and then Thomas appeared in the doorway with his hat in his hand, young and serious-faced, and she gave him his copy without ceremony and told him to ride careful, and he said, "Yes, ma'am," and left, and that was that. Some things that mattered enormously looked from the outside like almost nothing at all. Dell came to find her that afternoon with news she hadn't expected, wearing the expression of a man who has discovered something he'd rather not have to deliver. She was in the barn with the bay gelding she'd been working with him every day since the first time, and he'd started coming to her now without the preliminary circling which she took as one of the few uncomplicated satisfactions the week had offered. Dell came in and stood at the pen fence and watched her for a moment before he spoke. "I heard something in town," he said. "When I was waiting for Thomas to ride out, man at the feed store was talking." Clara kept her hand on the gelding's jaw. "What did you hear?" "Hayes called a meeting," Dell said. "Tonight, at his ranch house. His attorney, the county recorder, and—" He paused. "Judge Whitmore." Clara went still. "The circuit judge," she said. Yes, she knew the name. She'd known it before she'd ever come to this valley. Judge Whitmore had been on Hayes's payroll since 1872. He'd dismissed 2 previous challenges to land claims in this valley. He was the reason the county-level legal path had never been viable. "He's trying to get ahead of the federal inquiry," she said. "He wants Whitmore to issue a county-level ruling on the title dispute before Aldridge can establish federal jurisdiction." She turned to face Dell fully. "If Whitmore rules tonight, Hayes's attorneys will argue tomorrow morning that the matter is already adjudicated at the county level and federal inquiry is redundant." "Can he do that?" Dell said. "Legally. It's not entirely baseless," she said. "The argument would be weak in front of a real federal judge, but it would create enough procedural confusion to delay Aldridge's inquiry by weeks, maybe longer." She looked past Dell at the barn door. "And every week this drags on is another week Hayes has to interfere with this property's operations." Dell was quiet for a moment. "Ethan's going to want to know this," he said. "Yes," she said. "Where is he?" "North fence line." She was already walking out of the barn. She found him at the north fence, where he'd been working since mid-morning on the sections that Hayes's men had cut the previous month. He was methodical about it, working post to post, not rushing, the kind of work that showed a man's relationship to his land more clearly than almost anything else. He did it the way someone maintains something they intend to keep. He saw her coming and stopped. She told him about the meeting, about Whitmore. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down his wire stretcher and looked at the fence line for a moment, and she watched him work through it. Not the slow working through of someone unfamiliar with the terrain, but the fast, uncomfortable accounting of someone who sees exactly what it means and doesn't like what he sees. "If Whitmore rules tonight," Ethan said, "how long does it buy Hayes?" "Long enough," she said. "His attorneys will file the county ruling with the territorial court first thing tomorrow. Aldridge will receive a challenge to his inquiry jurisdiction within 48 hours. He's an honest man, but he's still one commissioner. He'll have to respond to the challenge before he can proceed." "Weeks," Ethan said. "At minimum." He looked out at the land. "Then we stop the meeting," he said. She looked at him. "How?" "By being there." "Ethan, not at Hayes's place, but Whitmore." He turned to look at her. "Whitmore's a circuit judge. He's supposed to follow territorial rules of procedure. He can't issue a ruling on a title dispute without notifying the parties to that dispute." Clara's mind caught up with what he was pointing at. "The notification requirement," she said. "If he's planning to convene tonight without notifying you as a named interested party, that's a procedural violation. It won't invalidate his ruling automatically, but it gives Aldridge grounds to challenge it." He paused. "But only if it's documented. Only if someone can show in writing that no notification was received." "I need to send a letter to Whitmore," she said immediately. "Directly, notifying him that I am a documented interested party in the Lone Creek title matter, and formally requesting to be informed of any proceedings. If he holds the meeting tonight without responding to that letter, then he's on record ignoring a procedural notification from a party to a federal inquiry," Clara said. "Aldridge can use that." They looked at each other. "That letter needs to reach Whitmore before tonight," Ethan said. Clara looked at the position of the sun. "It's 2:30, she said. "Where does Whitmore stay when he's in the valley?" "Bellamy Hotel," Ethan said. "County seat, hour-and-a-half ride." An hour and a half there. 30 minutes to locate Whitmore and present the letter. An hour and a half back if the rider pushed. "If someone rides now," she said. "I'll go," Ethan said. "No." She said it firmly enough that he stopped. Hayes's men are watching the main road. If they see you riding hard toward the county seat, the afternoon of Hayes's meeting, they'll know what you're doing, and they'll find a way to intercept it. Then who? Clara thought for 3 seconds. Me, she said. Ethan stared at her. They're watching for me at the ranch, she said. They're not watching every road in the territory. If I go now on the creek trail, I can reach the county seat from the east side. They won't be watching that road. Clara, if Hayes's men catch you on the road with that letter, then I don't let them catch me, she said. That is not a plan, he said. That is. It is the only option that doesn't telegraph our intentions before we're ready, she said. You need to stay here. You need to be on this property visible normal, so that if Hayes's men ride past, they see the Lone Creek operating exactly as it should and have no reason to think anything has changed. She held his gaze. I am the one who can move without being noticed. And I am the one this letter should come from. I am the interested party. My name on it is what makes it legally meaningful. He looked at her for a long, taut moment. You'll take the creek trail, he said. Not the main road. Yes. You'll ride the gray mare. She's fast and she's quiet. All right. And you'll... He stopped. Something moved through his face, something complicated and controlled. You'll come back. The way he said it was not an order. It was barely even a request. It was something else, something that sat in the space between practical concern and something he hadn't yet found the right words for. I'll come back, she said. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he said, I'll have her saddled in 10 minutes. She made the county seat in an hour 20. The gray mare was everything. Ethan had promised, smooth-gaited and responsive, and possessed of the particular intelligence of a horse that has been well handled and knows what it's doing. Clara rode hard, but not reckless, keeping to the creek trail until she hit the east road. And when she reached the edge of town, she slowed to a walk and pulled her hat low and moved through the afternoon streets like someone with ordinary business on an ordinary day. The Bellamy Hotel was not difficult to find. What was difficult was the man standing at the bar in the attached saloon, whom she recognized not from personal acquaintance, but from the photograph she'd seen in a county newspaper 3 years ago. Broad face, gray side whiskers, the self-satisfied posture of a man accustomed to rooms that rearranged themselves around him. Judge Whitmore. I was not alone. Cross was with him. Hayes's attorney, the same man who'd been filing at the county recorder's office when Dell had spotted him in Bitter Creek. They were having what appeared to be a comfortable drink and a comfortable conversation, and neither of them saw her. She stepped back before they could. Her heart was beating considerably faster than she wanted it to. She needed to present the letter to Whitmore directly and in a place where it could be documented. Not hand it to his hotel clerk, not slip it under his door directly in person with a witness. That was what made it legally unambiguous. She looked at the saloon, at the 2 men at the bar. She thought about 11 years. She thought about her father's voice in the journal. She thought about the note on Ethan's kitchen table, 4 words, and the particular kind of cowardice it took to threaten a person who was asking for nothing more than what was already rightfully theirs. She walked into the saloon. The room was not crowded. Mid-afternoon. A half-dozen men scattered at tables, the barkeep, and the 2 men at the bar. She walked to the bar directly 3 feet from Whitmore and Cross, and placed her letter on the bar top. Judge Whitmore, she said. Both men turned. Whitmore's expression moved through surprise recognition. He'd clearly been told to look for her. She could see it in the split second before he controlled his face, and then a deliberate, practiced composure. I don't believe I know you, miss, he said. My name is Clara Bennett, she said. I am a documented interested party in the matter of the Lone Creek Valley Land Title Inquiry, currently under federal review by Commissioner Aldridge. This is my formal notification to you as a circuit judge of this territory that I am requesting to be included in any proceedings related to that matter. She pushed the letter across the bar toward him. I'd appreciate your acknowledgement. Cross reached for the letter. That letter is addressed to Judge Whitmore, she said without looking at Cross. Not to you. Cross's hand stopped. Whitmore picked up the letter. He did not open it. He looked at her with the eyes of a man calculating distances and coming up short. "Miss Bennett," he said, "this is hardly Judge Whitmore." The barkeep's voice dry and uninflected from behind the bar. He'd been watching the whole exchange with the careful attention of a man who understood without being told that something significant was happening. "You want me to note the time of receipt for the record?" Whitmore looked at the barkeep. The barkeep looked back. He had the patient, permanent expression of a man who'd seen a great deal and was not easily persuaded to look away from things he'd seen. 2:54 in the afternoon, the barkeep said. Thursday, August 9th. Clara did not smile. She wanted to. "Thank you," she said to the barkeep calmly. Then she looked at Whitmore. "Good afternoon, Judge." She turned and walked out. Her hands were shaking by the time she reached the gray mare. She stood beside the horse for 30 full seconds, breathing, letting the shaking run its course, and then she mounted and she rode. She made it back to the Lone Creek by 6 in the evening. Ethan was at the gate. He'd been watching the road. She could tell by the way he was standing the particular quality of stillness in a man who is keeping himself from pacing. When he saw her coming, he moved forward, and his face did something she'd only seen it do once before, in the back room, the night they'd found the Carver letter, when relief and something more complicated had moved through him simultaneously. She pulled up and swung down before the mare had fully stopped. "Whitmore received it," she said. "In the saloon with Cross present, and the barkeep noted the time." She looked at him. He can't convene tonight without it being on record that he ignored a formal notification. Ethan looked at her. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He put his hand on her arm, just his hand on her arm, brief and certain and warm, and said, "Good. Just that. Just good." In a voice that held about 6 things it wasn't saying. She looked at his hand. He moved it, stepped back. "Come inside," he said. "You need to eat." "We need to write to Aldridge about the meeting," she said. "We can do both," he said. "Come inside." She followed him, and the gray mare was taken by one of the hands, and the evening settled over the Lone Creek with the dust and heat quality of a Wyoming summer night, and inside the ranch house. Clara sat at the kitchen table for what felt like the 100th time, and accepted a plate of food from a man who wasn't saying everything he was thinking, and found that she didn't mind that, because neither was she. The twist came at 9 o'clock in the evening, and it came in a form neither of them had anticipated. A rider arrived at the gate, not Hayes's man, not a federal courier, not anyone Clara recognized. He was young, mud-spattered, clearly having ridden hard from a distance, and he asked for Clara Bennett by name, with the urgent directness of someone who's been told that the name matters and the timing matters more. Ethan brought him to the kitchen. The young man's name was Peter Aldridge. Clara went very still when he said it. "Aldridge," she said. "The commissioner's." "His nephew," the young man said. He pulled a letter from inside his coat. "My uncle sent me directly. He said the post wasn't safe for this." She took the letter, opened it. She read it once. Then she set it on the table and looked at Ethan. "Aldridge has moved faster than I expected," she said. "The freeze order has been escalated. He's not just freezing transactions. He's petitioned the territorial governor for emergency oversight of all county land records in this valley pending inquiry." She paused. "The county recorder's office will be under federal supervision by tomorrow morning." Ethan stared at her. "The recorder," she said, "will not be able to alter, destroy, or add any document to the record without federal witness." "Which means," Ethan said slowly, "which means the fraudulent reversal document that Carver created in 1861, Clara said, is now preserved under federal protection. Hayes cannot have it altered or removed." She looked at the letter again. "And the Carver letter. We found the one that proves Hayes orchestrated the whole thing. Aldridge received it and has had it authenticated by a federal examiner." Peter Aldridge, still standing in the kitchen doorway, was watching the two of them with the wide-eyed attention of a young man who understood he'd delivered something significant, but not entirely the scope of it. "My uncle said to tell you," he said, looking at Clara, "that the authenticated documents are now part of a federal record. They cannot be suppressed." Clara sat back in her chair. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter with his arms crossed and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and Clara recognized it as the posture of a man absorbing something enormous. "It's not over," she said. "I need to keep saying that. Hayes will fight this. His attorneys will challenge federal jurisdiction. Whitmore may still try to issue his county ruling tonight. There will be months of legal process." "But he can't make it disappear," Ethan said. "No," she said. "He can't make it disappear." Ethan looked at her. For a moment, just a moment, the controlled, careful surface he maintained slipped slightly. Not into weakness, into something more human than that. Something that looked a great deal like the feeling of a weight that has been carried for 2 years and has just very slightly shifted. "Stay the night," he said to Peter Aldridge. "Bunkhouse, we'll feed you and your horse." "Thank you, sir," the young man said. Ethan nodded toward Dell, who'd appeared in the doorway at some point during the exchange and would know what to do. Then Ethan looked at Clara. "I need to ask you something," he said. She looked up at him. "When this is settled," he said. "The inquiry, the title, however it comes out. What do you want?" She looked at him steadily. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he paused. "You've been carrying this for 11 years. You came here to get the truth. You've got the truth. You've got Aldridge and the federal record and the Carver letter authenticated." He looked at her carefully. "So what do you want to happen next to you? Not to the land. To you." Clara was quiet. It was a question she hadn't let herself answer in a very long time. Not because she didn't know, but because wanting things that weren't certain was a habit she'd trained herself out of by necessity. "I want it to be finished," she said. "The fight. I want it to be finished. And after it's finished." She looked at her father's journal on the table. "I don't know," she said. "I've been moving toward this for so long that I haven't spent much time thinking about what comes after. Maybe it's time to start," he said. She looked at him. He wasn't talking only about plans. She understood that. And the fact that she understood it, that she heard the thing underneath what he was actually saying, told her something about how much had changed in a week. About how far things had moved from the morning she'd knocked on a stranger's door with blood in her boot and a dead man's journal in her saddlebag. "Maybe it is," she said. Outside the night pressed warm against the windows, and the land held its water and its secrets and its complicated history. And inside the Lone Creek ranch house, 2 people sat in the kitchen, not quite saying the thing they meant, and both of them knowing it, and neither of them quite ready to mind. Then the gunshot hit the front window, not through it wide, deliberate, meant to be heard rather than to hit anything. A warning shot. The particular kind that says we're here and we know you're there and nothing else yet. Ethan was on his feet before the sound finished. Clara was right behind him. "Stay back," he said. "No," she said. He looked at her. "No," she said again, flat and final. "I am done staying back. Whatever is outside that door is there because of me, and I am not going to sit in your kitchen while you handle it." He looked at her for 1 second, one full assessing second, and then he handed her the smaller pistol from the hook by the door. She took it without comment. They went to the front door together. Ethan opened it. The yard was lit by a half moon and by the light spilling from the bunkhouse windows where the hands had clearly heard the shot and were awake and moving. In the middle of the road just inside the gate were 4 riders. Not the same 4 as before. These men were different, older. Harder, the particular professional quality of men who are paid specifically for situations like this one. And in the center of them, on a large bay horse, was a man Clara had never seen in person, but recognized immediately from descriptions that went back 11 years. Victor Hayes was 60 years old. He looked like money and certainty, and the particular kind of arrogance that comes from decades of getting what you want by removing every obstacle that stood in the way. He looked at the porch at Ethan, and then his eyes moved to Clara. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he thought he'd solved. "Walker," he said. His voice was the voice of a man accustomed to being the loudest thing in any room. "I think you and I need to have a direct conversation." "You shot my window," Ethan said. "A misfire," Hayes said. "My apologies." "That wasn't a misfire," Ethan said. Hayes didn't argue the point. He looked at Clara again. Miss Bennett, he said, I'll be plain with you. Whatever you think those documents prove, you're wrong. The Bennett claim was legitimately cleared in 1861, and any evidence to the contrary is now in federal hands, Clara said. Authenticated, on record, part of a Commissioner Aldridge inquiry that you cannot close and cannot alter. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Aldridge is one man, he said. He is, Clara said. But the documents aren't in his hands anymore. They're in the federal record. The Territorial Governor's Office received a copy this afternoon. The Federal Land Office in Washington received a telegraph summary 2 hours ago. She looked at him steadily. You could remove Aldridge Judge Whitmore, the county recorder, and every lawyer in this territory, Mr. Hayes, and the record would still exist. Hayes looked at her. He had a very controlled face. She'd expected that. Men who operated the way he did learned to keep their reactions internal. But something moved in his eyes that she recognized because she'd been watching for it for 11 years. He knew it was over. He didn't admit it. Men like Hayes didn't admit things. But he knew. This isn't finished, he said. No, Ethan said from her right. But you're finished here. Get off my land. Hayes looked at Ethan for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara. Your father, he said, was a stubborn man. Yes, Clara said. He was. A pause. Seems it runs in the family, Hayes said. He pulled his horse around. His 4 men followed. They rode out through the gate and down the road, and the sound of them faded, and the yard was quiet. Ethan stood on the porch beside Clara and watched the gate. Dell's voice came from the direction of the barn. They gone. They're gone, Ethan said. For tonight, Clara said quietly. For tonight, he agreed. She was still holding the pistol he'd given her. She looked at it, then handed it back to him. Grip first. Their hands were close for a moment when he took it. Neither of them moved away immediately. You said he's finished, she said. Do you believe that? I believe the law has him, Ethan said, and I believe he knows it. He paused. Men like Hayes don't fight battles they can't win. They look for a different angle. There isn't one left, Clara said. Not on this, he agreed. Not now. She exhaled slowly. The adrenaline was clearing the way it always did, leaving behind it the bone-deep tiredness that was the true cost of running on fear and determination for too long. You need sleep, Ethan said. So do you. I know. He didn't move. Clara. She looked at him. Whatever Aldridge rules, he said. Whatever the title comes out to be. I want you to know. He stopped. Started again. This place has been mine to care for, to hold, whatever the papers say. He paused. But you belong here as much as I do. Maybe more. She looked at him for a long moment. We'll talk about that, she said. When it's truly finished. When it's finished, he agreed. But neither of them moved to go inside. The summer night held them there on the porch of the Lone Creek ranch house, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him beside her in the cooling air. And somewhere under the dry Wyoming ground, the cold spring water ran on in the dark, deep and clean and indifferent to everything that lived and fought and hoped above it. It would still be running when this was done. That Clara thought was something. They didn't sleep much that night, not from fear. The fear had settled into something quieter and more manageable after Hayes wrote out the specific exhaustion that follows a confrontation that ended without the worst happening. But the mind didn't stop just because the body wanted it to. Clara lay on the cot in the storage room off the barn and stared at the dark and ran through every variable she could still see. Every legal thread that Hayes's attorneys might pull. Every procedural argument Cross could make. Every way a man with 30 years of practice corrupting institutions might find one more angle she hadn't anticipated. She was still running through them at 4 in the morning when she heard Ethan's boots on the barn floor. He didn't come to her door. He just walked through the barn slow and quiet the way a man walks when he's checking his property. Not because he expects trouble, but because the checking itself is what settles him. She heard him pause at each stall. heard the low, brief sound he made to the horses. Heard him stop outside her door for a moment, just a moment, and then keep walking. She lay in the dark after the sound of his boots faded and thought about what it meant to trust someone. Not the legal contractual trust of documents and signatures, the other kind. The kind that didn't have a mechanism for enforcement. The kind that was just a choice repeated daily to believe that a person would do what they said they would do. She'd stopped making that choice 11 years ago. She wasn't entirely sure when she'd started making it again. She was asleep by 5. Morning came with a telegraph message. Peter Aldridge, the commissioner's nephew, had stayed the night as Ethan offered, and he was the one who rode to the county seat at first light on an errand Ethan had arranged to check the telegraph office for any communication addressed to the Lone Creek or to Clara Bennett in care of same. He came back at 8:30 with an envelope and a look on his face that was trying very hard not to indicate how significant its contents might be. Clara was at the kitchen table with Ethan and Dell when Peter came in. She opened the envelope. It was from Aldridge's office. 3 sentences. The language of federal bureaucracy, which was designed to be precise and impossible to misread. She read it once. Then she set it on the table and looked at the wall for a moment, because she needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't a person. "Clara," Ethan said. She looked at him. "The county recorder," she said, "resigned this morning." His letter of resignation was received by the territorial governor's office at 7 a.m. In the letter, he acknowledged that records under his supervision had been altered during his tenure. She paused. "He's requesting immunity in exchange for full cooperation with the federal inquiry." The kitchen was completely silent. Dell sat back in his chair with the careful deliberateness of a man making sure he didn't knock anything over. "He's talking," Ethan said. "He's talking," Clara said. 30 years of records. Every land transaction Hayes touched. Every document that was altered or suppressed or fabricated. She looked at the telegraph. "Aldridge says, and I'm reading this exactly, that the Bennett claim has been, quote, provisionally validated pending formal adjudication, and that no action may be taken against any party currently occupying Lone Creek property, pending the outcome of full proceedings." Dell made a sound that started as something controlled and ended as something that was just relief, plain and unconcealed. Peter Aldridge, still standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, looked like a young man who had just understood that he had personally carried something historic. Ethan looked at Clara. She looked back at him, and she thought, this is what 11 years looks like from the other side. This is what it costs, and this is what it buys, and this is the moment that was supposed to feel like something enormous, and instead just feels like being able to breathe. She breathed. "It's not finished," she said, because she had to say it because the habit of caution was too deeply trained to release all at once. "There will be formal proceedings. Hayes's attorneys will still fight. This is provisional." "Clara," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "I know." She picked up her father's journal from the table. She held it for a moment. Then she set it back down. "He would have wanted to see this," she said. "Not to anyone specifically, just to the room. Nobody said anything because there was nothing useful to say, and the people in this kitchen had all learned in various ways that sometimes the most respectful thing is silence." Hayes moved by 9 o'clock. Not with riders. Not this time. His attorney Cross arrived at the Lone Creek gate in a buggy alone, which was so unexpected that Ethan stood at the porch and just watched him come up the drive for a moment before he said anything. Cross stopped the buggy 20 feet from the porch. He was a precise man in a precise suit, and he had the expression of someone executing an instruction he'd been given that he personally found distasteful. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I'm here on behalf of my client." "I figured," Ethan said. "What does your client want?" "My client wishes to communicate that he is prepared to withdraw his competing claim and cooperate with the federal inquiry in exchange for—" "No," Clara said. She'd come out of the house behind Ethan and now stood at his right shoulder, and Cross looked at her with the faint startlement of a man who hadn't expected to be interrupted before he'd finished his sentence. "Miss Bennett, whatever he's offering, no," she said. "Mr. Hayes does not get to negotiate the terms of accountability. The federal inquiry is not a transaction. It is a process, and it will proceed as Commissioner Aldridge determines, not as Victor Hayes prefers. Cross looked at her steadily. My client is prepared to offer substantial— I heard you, she said. The answer is no. Cross shifted in the buggy seat. He looked at Ethan. Perhaps Mr. Walker— She speaks for herself, Ethan said. And in this particular matter, she speaks for me too. Cross looked at both of them. Then he looked at his hands on the reins. My client will not find this response agreeable, he said. I expect not, Clara said. Good morning, Mr. Cross. Cross turned the buggy and drove back down the road. Ethan watched him go. He was testing us, Ethan said. Seeing if we'd take a deal that let Hayes control the narrative. Yes, Clara said. If we'd negotiated, Hayes could have shaped the outcome, controlled what got revealed and what didn't. She looked at the retreating buggy. He's desperate. Desperate men offer deals. He's been doing this for 30 years, Ethan said. How desperate can he actually be? Clara looked at him. He just watched his county recorder resign and start talking to a federal commissioner. 30 years of carefully managed corruption, and in 48 hours, the man who knew all of it decided federal immunity was worth more than loyalty to Hayes. She paused. He's very desperate. Ethan nodded slowly. Good, he said. The second twist arrived not from Hayes, but from Dell, and it arrived at noon, and it changed the shape of things in a way Clara had not calculated. Dell came to find her in the barn. She was with the bay gelding again, who had taken to greeting her now by pushing his nose against her shoulder, which was the specific equine communication of a creature that had decided on a person. And Dell came in and leaned on the fence rail and looked at her sideways for a moment before he spoke. I need to tell you something, Dell said. And I want you to hear it before anyone else tells you, because how you hear it matters. Clara turned from the horse. What is it? Dell looked at his hands. Aldridge's people have been going through the county records all morning, under federal supervision. He paused. They found the original Bennett deed, not a copy, the original. It had been filed in 1853, confirmed in 1855, and then according to the recorder who's now talking, it was physically removed from the record in 1861 and replaced with the fraudulent reversal. He paused again. It was in a lockbox in the recorder's private office, has been there for 30 years. Clara stood very still. The original deed, she said. Your father's name, his signature, the original territorial confirmation stamp. Dell looked at her. It's real, Clara. It's always been real. Nobody destroyed it. They just hid it. She put her hand on the fence rail. Not for support, just to have something solid under her palm. They kept it, she said. Reckon they needed it, Dell said. To have leverage over each other. The recorder Hayes Carver back before he died. If you hold the original document, you hold the power. None of them wanted to destroy it completely, because destroying it meant losing that. He watched her. It means the title chain is clear. Your father's claim was never legally extinguished. It was fraudulently suppressed. She understood what he was saying legally and practically. She understood it faster than she could process what it meant to her as a person. That's the cleanest possible outcome for the federal case, she said. Aldridge won't need to untangle competing claims. There's only one valid claim, my father's. Yes, Dell said. She looked at him. And this ranch, she said, is on that land, Dell said. Yes. She was quiet. The bay gelding pushed his nose against her shoulder again. She reached up automatically and put her hand on his jaw, the way she always did, the steadying, familiar gesture of it. Where's Ethan? She said. North fence line, Dell said. He doesn't know yet. He paused. I thought you should decide how to tell him. Clara looked at the barn door. She thought about Ethan on that fence line, working the way he worked. Methodical, steady, the relationship of a man and his land expressed in daily maintenance. She thought about what it had cost him to help her, when helping her might mean losing everything he'd built. She thought about the morning she'd arrived at this gate with blood in her boot and nothing else, and what he'd offered her then, and what he'd offered her since, and what he'd never once asked for in return. She thought about the conversation he'd said he wanted to have. When it's finished. "Thank you, Dell," she said. She walked out of the barn. He saw her coming from a distance and straightened up from the fence line, reading her face the way he'd learned to read it over the past week. The specific language of her expression, which was its own kind of document if you knew how to read it. He knew something had happened, something significant. She stopped a few feet from him. "Dell told you something," he said. "Yes." She looked at him directly. "They found the original Bennett deed. In the recorder's lockbox. Your father's name is not on it. My father's is the only valid title." She paused. "The legal case is clear. Aldridge will rule in favor of the Bennett claim. This land is legally mine." Ethan was quiet. He turned and looked at the fence line he'd been working. At the posts he'd set, and the wire he'd stretched, and the land beyond it that stretched out toward the valley in all directions. Clara watched him. She watched the way he stood in it, not collapsing, not performing anything, just standing in the actual weight of what she'd said and letting it be what it was. "Your father built this house," she said. He looked back at her. "He built the barn and the bunkhouse, and he ran cattle on this land for 20 years, she said. "He didn't steal it. He was deceived same as my father was, just differently." She paused. "That matters to me. I want you to know that it matters." "Clara." "I'm not finished," she said. He stopped. "I've spent 11 years thinking about getting back what was taken from my family," she said. "I've thought about what winning this would feel like, and I've thought about what justice looks like, and I've thought about what my father would have wanted." She looked at the land. "I don't think he would have wanted me to take something away from a man who earned it honestly. I don't think that's what he was fighting for." She looked back at Ethan. He was fighting for the principle, for the truth to be acknowledged, for Hayes to be held accountable. Ethan was very still. "What are you saying?" he said. "I'm saying," she said, "that the land is legally mine, and I am not going to take it from you." He stared at her. "I'm saying," she continued, "that there is a legal instrument called a joint deed. That my attorney, who is a real attorney before you ask, I hired him 6 months ago in Cheyenne, has already drafted an agreement that I asked him to draft because I've been thinking about this for 3 months." She met his eyes steadily. "I want us to hold this land together, legally, formally, as equal parties. The Lone Creek stays whole. The cattle stay. The men stay. Dell stays." She paused. "And the truth is on record. My father's name is restored. Hayes is accountable. And this place doesn't have to change." Ethan looked at her. He looked at her for so long that she became aware of her own heartbeat in a way she usually managed not to be. "You planned this," he said. "I planned for the possibility," she said. "I didn't know how it would come out. I didn't know if you'd be the kind of man I could offer it to." "And now?" "Now I know," she said. He looked out at the land again. She watched his profile, the particular quality of his stillness which she'd learned was not absence, but the opposite of it was presence so complete it had no need to perform itself. "A joint deed," he said. "Equal shares," she said. "Equal responsibility, equal say in how this place is run." "That's not how ranches work," he said. "No," she agreed. "Usually they don't." A pause. "You'd stay," he said. "Here. If you'll have me," she said. "As a legal partner." Something moved through his face. "As a legal partner," he said. "To start," she said. He looked at her. She looked back. And there it was, the thing that had been building in the kitchen, and at the fence line, and in the back room at midnight, and on the porch with Hayes's riders in the road. The thing neither of them had said yet, because the ground hadn't been solid enough to say it on. The ground was solid now. "I'd have you as more than a legal partner," Ethan said. "If you're willing to hear that." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I'm willing to hear it," she said. "I'm not ready to answer it yet." "Fair enough," he said immediately. No pressure, no persuasion. Just the steady acceptance of a man who understood the difference between yes and not yet, and knew which one this was. "But I'm not leaving," she said. "No," he said. "You're not." She looked at the land. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "The spring," she said. "The water under this property. It's substantial enough to support irrigation, which means this ranch could expand considerably beyond cattle." She paused. "And it means the neighboring properties that Hayes was trying to acquire, they're all struggling. All of them have people on them who've been fighting the same battle just without the evidence we had." She looked at him. "When Aldridge's inquiry finishes and Hayes's operation is fully exposed, those families are going to need help. Legal help, financial help, practical help, rebuilding what was taken from them." Ethan looked at her. "You want to use the water," he said. "I want to make this land useful to more people than just us," she said. "My father built here because he believed a person could make something real out here, something that lasted." She paused. "I'd like to try to honor that." He was quiet for a moment. "That's going to cost money," he said. "Yes," she said. "And time." "Yes. And it's going to mean a great deal of arguing with lawyers and bankers and territorial officials for months." "Probably years," she said. He looked at her sideways. "You're not easy," he said. "No," she agreed. "I'm not." Something happened in his face. The thing she'd been cataloging since the beginning. The not-quite smile that was somehow more honest than a full one. The specific warmth that he kept controlled but couldn't quite eliminate. "Good," he said. The formal ruling came 6 weeks later. Aldridge delivered it in person, which was unusual enough that it drew a small crowd to the county seat ranchers from 4 neighboring valleys, a reporter from the territorial newspaper, 2 of Hayes's former business associates who had apparently decided that federal cooperation was in their best interest, and a court recorder who was not the previous one. Clara was there. Ethan was beside her. Victor Hayes was not present. His attorney Cross delivered a statement on his behalf acknowledging the findings of the federal inquiry. The statement used the word regret once and the word cooperation 4 times, and contained no admission of personal wrongdoing, which his attorney had clearly worked very hard to achieve. Aldridge read the ruling in the measured, careful tone of a man who understood that the words he was saying would be part of a permanent record. The Bennett claim was validated. The 1861 reversal was declared fraudulent. The county recorder of record at the time was found to have participated in the fraud, a finding that would attach to the historical record permanently. Victor Hayes was referred to federal prosecutors for charges including land fraud, evidence suppression, and conspiracy, and the Lone Creek Ranch, Wyoming territory was recorded in the name of Clara Bennett and Ethan Walker, joint deed holders, in equal and perpetual share. Aldridge looked up from the document when he finished reading. He looked at Clara. "Your father filed his original claim on March 14, 1853, Aldridge said. "That date is now part of the permanent federal record. The Bennett name is restored." Clara stood very straight. She did not cry. She hadn't cried since the day they buried her father, and she wasn't going to start now in a courtroom in front of a federal commissioner. But she held on to the edge of the table for a moment. Just a moment. And Ethan, standing beside her, moved his hand and covered hers on the table edge without saying a word. She didn't move away. They rode back to the Lone Creek in the late afternoon, the 2 of them on the creek trail that she'd ridden alone 2 weeks ago at a desperate pace, and now rode slowly with no urgency, with the particular quality of people who have arrived somewhere and are in no hurry to leave. Neither of them spoke for a long time. It was Ethan who broke it, and characteristically he broke it with something direct. "That conversation I said I wanted to have," he said. She looked over at him from her horse. "Yes," she said. "I'd like to have it," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not a man who—" He paused. Tried again. "I don't say things I don't mean. And I don't mean things I'm not prepared to follow through on." He looked at her steadily from his horse. "So when I say that I would like you to stay on this property permanently, and that my interest in that is not purely legal or practical, I mean that plainly." Clara looked at him. The creek trail, the summer afternoon, the sound of their horses on the dry ground. All of it ordinary. All of it she thought exactly what it should be. I know you mean it plainly, she said. That's one of the things She stopped. That's one of the things that makes it easier to answer. He waited. She looked at him. I'm not easy, she said again. I think you know that. I've been alone for a long time and I have opinions about most things, and I don't stop working when I probably should, and I will argue with you when I think you're wrong. I know, he said. And I'm going to spend considerable time and energy on the neighboring families and the water rights and the legal aftermath of all of this, and it's going to require patience from both of us, and there will be difficult months. Clara, he said. What? I'm aware of all of that, he said. I've been watching you work for 10 days. I know exactly what I'm asking. She looked at him. Then yes, she said, to the conversation, and to whatever comes out of it. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. That's enough, he said. For now, that's enough. They rode. The Lone Creek came into view ahead of them, the house and the barn and the bunkhouse and all of it exactly as it had been every day for 20 years, exactly as it would be tomorrow. The specific continuity of a place that had survived what had been done to it and was still standing. Dell was at the gate when they came in. He looked at their faces, both faces reading them in the way of a man who has known one of them for 30 years and has made up his mind about the other, and he nodded once to himself and opened the gate. Ruling go through, he said. Yes, Ethan said. Joint deed. Joint deed, Clara said. Dell looked at her. Welcome home, Miss Bennett, he said. Clara looked at the gate, at the property beyond it, at the house her father's hands had never built, but that held the truth of everything he'd spent his life trying to protect. She rode through. The bay gelding was in the corral. She could see him from here, his head up watching her approach the way he'd learned to do in the past 10 days, the specific attention of a creature that had decided on a person and was keeping track of where they were. She thought about her father's journal still in her saddlebag, still carried on her person as it had been every day for 11 years. She thought that tonight she might set it down. Not permanently, not forever. But tonight on a shelf in a room that was legally hers, on land that bore her father's name, in a federal record that could never be altered or suppressed again. She thought she might let herself stop carrying it for one night. George Pitts came out of the barn when she dismounted, and he took her horse with the natural ease of a man who had made a decision about her around day 3 and had been acting on it quietly ever since. Good news, he said. Good news, she said. He nodded, led the horse away. Ethan came to stand beside her in the yard. The evening was settling. The Wyoming heat softening by degrees. The first suggestion of the night cooling that would make sleep possible in a few hours. The hands were moving through the end-of-day routines. Horses feed water. The ordinary productive sounds of a working ranch at the close of a working day. Ethan stood beside her, and they looked at it together. I want to tell you something, he said. She looked up at him. My father, he said, told me once that the thing about land is that it doesn't care who holds the deed. It just is. It was here before us, and it'll be here after us, and what we do on it is the only part that's actually ours. He paused. I didn't entirely understand what he meant when he said it. I think I do now. Clara looked at the land. What he did on it, she said. What we'll do on it. Yes, he said. She looked at him. Something had settled in her that she couldn't have named 3 weeks ago when she'd been standing in the dust of the road with blood in her boot and nothing behind her, and one direction to move in. The restlessness that had driven her for 11 years. The relentless forward motion of a person with unfinished business had not disappeared, but it had changed character. It was no longer the motion of someone running toward something she might not reach. It was the motion of someone who had arrived and was choosing deliberately what to build next. My father used to say, she said, that a home isn't the land, it's the people who decide to stay. Ethan was quiet. He was right, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back, and the yard moved around them with its ordinary sounds and its ordinary light, and the Lone Creek held them both in it, the way a place holds the people who have fought for it and chosen it and refused to let it go. "I'm staying," she said. Ethan Walker looked at Clara Bennett in the last light of a Wyoming summer evening on land that had been fought over and lied about and nearly lost. And finally, after 30 years of someone else's dishonesty and 11 years of her relentless honesty, reclaimed not just in law, but in the deeper, more durable sense of a place belonging to the people willing to deserve it. He put his hat back on his head. "I know," he said. And the Lone Creek Ranch, in the summer of 1884, held 2 names on its deed and 2 people in its yard, and all the ordinary and extraordinary days still ahead of them. And the cold spring water ran beneath it all, deep and clean and permanent, indifferent to everything except the fact that it was there. It had always been there. It always would be. A home is not built by the papers that record it. It is built by the people who choose every morning to stay and fight for it, and in so doing, make it worth fighting for.